So this section is part of the social cultural studies contemporary issues section, and we're looking at specifically drugs in sport. We're going to have to consider why some athletes might choose to take drugs to enhance their performance. We're going to look at the consequences of them doing this. Is it all bad? Are there outcomes and side effects related to their health, their well-being, and the fact that they're probably role models to young and up-and-coming athletes? And then lastly, to consider the ways in which maybe we can try to address this issue and maybe solve it in terms of being a problem. So in London 2012 and in Sochi 2014, the Olympic opening ceremonies involved one athlete, one official and one coach standing and holding the flag, and they represent all the participants in the Olympics, and they read out the Olympic oath. Now, the athletes part of this says that in the name of all competitors, I promise we shall take part in these games without doping and without drugs, in the true spirit of sport and of sportsmanship. And the Olympic ideal is very much about fair play and sportsmanship. And clearly stating this and taking part in the Olympics, one assumes that therefore you believe in that and you have no desire to essentially cheat and take drugs that are prohibited. However, we know from various stories and headline news that this does occur, and so sadly drug taking and testing is a central part of too many athletes. In Beijing and London, undoubtedly there was a number of athletes who also were drug tested. I know for a fact in Athens 2004, 23 athletes, which at that point was the most ever, were found to have taken banned substances. So it would be wise for you maybe to look up London 2012 and perhaps Beijing 2008 to see the numbers and the proportion of athletes that were caught. So what kind of drugs might they wish to take? Why would they take these particular drugs? And you can see here in the grey kind of categories of drugs. So we've got some drugs which are stimulants, amphetamines, cocaine and caffeine. Now caffeine isn't banned, but it is monitored, and there's only a certain amount that the guidelines allow you to have in your system, and they are clearly to increase reaction time and responsiveness and give you energy. We've got some drugs which are intended to build muscle and possibly bone, and you might recognise anabolic steroids, and you can imagine the sort of athlete, the power, strong, speed athletes that might be tempted by taking those. Also HGH, the human growth hormone, has a similar kind of effect in terms of being able to train harder, train longer, and having better improvement from that training. There are other athletes who might wish to take something that relaxes you, and beta blockers is certainly a way in which you can slow your heart rate and steady your hand. So activities where aiming is important might benefit from those. We've got drugs that mask pain. So if you are injured, you might wish to take narcotic analgesics. They're basically painkillers. And obviously there's good and bad to that. One, your body is telling you it's hurting for a reason, but some will undoubtedly be banned or limited in terms of how much or what you can take. There are some techniques involved, and these aren't drugs, but these are strategies in which athletes can try to increase their oxygen carrying potential. EPO is naturally produced in our body, but it can be synthetically made, and some athletes may be tempted in using EPO synthetically to produce more red blood cells and therefore more hemoglobin. Similarly, blood doping is a strategy where you extract some blood, your body produces its own to make up for that, and then you infuse that blood, that original blood, back and end up with greater proportion of red blood cells. Now, endurance athletes are clearly tempted by these to help the oxygen provision. Weight loss, so things like boxing, possibly riding, have weight categories, and diuretics basically make you wee more and therefore can help you lose water and fluid, which reduces your weight. And then these are also important drugs, because whilst you might take some of these illegal drugs, you might use a masking agent to try to disguise the fact that you've had these drugs and cover up, basically. So what are the reasons people or athletes take drugs? They might be physiological, psychological, social, or have some other kind of reason for taking drugs. So let's look at the physiology. We've already established that steroids or anabolic steroids can increase muscle mass. You can increase energy with certain drugs, particularly the stimulants. You can increase oxygen transport if you use EPO or blood doping as a strategy. You can lose weight. The diuretics make you lose weight. Anabolics also make you train harder, and obviously if you train harder and longer, you can have better physiological gain. We know some of the drugs like diuretics also mask injury, and stimulants can reduce tiredness. Now that's a terrible spelling of caffeine, but obviously we know it can, as a stimulant, it can increase your awareness and your readiness. Some psychological factors might be to steady nerves or control your arousal level. We don't want to be overexcited, we don't want to be underexcited, we want an optimal level. We know that aiming activities can be good for that. It can give you confidence, you might feel more psychologically ready, even if it is or isn't having an effect on you. The fact you've taken a drug might make you feel more confident. Anabolic steroids can definitely increase aggression. There's a phrase called roid rage, and that's an excessive aggressive behaviour that comes from taking steroids, and motivation might be increased. So social reasons, there might be immense pressure on the athletes to win. They've maybe up and coming athlete, by their sponsors, by coaches, by the possible gains, and so they want to earn money and win more. They've got endorsements that they've got to, obviously, in order to keep the endorsements and the sponsors, they need to do well, so there might be social pressure. This win ethic, this Lombardian ethic, is coming more and more in our competitive elite sport. They might be frightened if they have been winning. They might have been frightened of actually being a loser and moving down the rankings. They might believe other people are doing it, so why not? And things might be entertaining if you are more confident. If you take drugs that stimulate you, you might perform. The crowd will love you even more. And importantly, if there aren't enough deterrents in place, then athletes might think that they can get away with it, and that might be reason for them to take it. So other reasons might include things like appearance, so anabolic steroids building muscle mass and looking good. Athletes and coaches might not be educated and aware of the dangers of taking certain drugs. Again, if they believe everybody's doing it, that's a get out clause. And we've established already maybe there aren't deterrents in place. So if there's not effective testing, they can have a better chance of getting away with taking the drugs. So what might be the consequences of taking drugs in sport? Well, Marion Jones, an American athlete, won 5 gold medals, and later the tests showed that she had taken drugs, and she was stripped of her medals and publicly embarrassed and shamed. Mr. Armstrong, as we know, recovering from cancer, won the Tour de France multiple times, 7 times, everybody's hero, until despite years of denying it, he admitted and was caught blood doping, and therefore is shamed. Our own Dwayne Chambers, a 100-metre athlete, was caught taking drugs and was banned for 2 years before eventually returning to athletics, but with very mixed response from other athletes and from the public. So some consequences of taking drugs might be psychological. You might have roid rage, you might become exceptionally aggressive, you might become paranoid, you might become might become scarred by the fact that there are lots of Eastern European athletes in the past who have been taking drugs, but they were young athletes and they were told to take pills by their coaches who they trusted, and it basically grossly affected them, their physical self, their emotional self, and they were very damaged by it. There might be physiological damage. Steroids, for example, can affect fertility, can affect lots of important organs, kidneys and livers. You may, if you get caught, you may lose your status in the sporting world. You may lose your reputation and people's respect. You may be banned. You might be banned permanently or for life from the Olympics. And, in some cases it's illegal. Certainly all the sports and the national governing bodies determine their guidelines in terms of what drugs can and can't be used or how much. But some drugs are actually illegal. And actually we've got to question taking drugs in terms of morality. sport, really was intended to be fair and honest and play by rules. We've got to look at health, as we've established. There are some really damaging consequences of taking drugs to your physical self. Elements of it being against the law of the sport or the law of the land, so the legality, and also the social aspects. The fact that you might cycling is very much hand in hand with blood doping and EPO taking, and it really shadows over the sport, and also you as an individual role model and being looked up to by lots of young people. So what can we actually do about this drug taking in sport? What might be solutions? And there's a real sort of ambiguity in response to this, whether we can or can't actually do something successful to solve it. One thing WADA, W-A-D-A, is the World Anti-Doping Agency, and they set out very strict guidelines and expectations and rules as to what's okay and what's not okay. And these need to be shared and filtered down to coaches and athletes. The UK Anti-Doping in Sport Agency have a strategy called 100% Me, and this basically, as it says, gives support to athletes and educates them to promote anti-doping. We need to really educate not just the athletes but the coaches as well, because coaches can often be very, very ignorant to some of the serious consequences and the implications. There's a lot to be said for testing and monitoring drugs and the guidelines that come from it, so more prevalent testing. Positive role models. Let's highlight those athletes that don't take drugs and are very successful. Let's randomise testing, make it anytime, any place, because as long as athletes think that they can manipulate the testing procedures, they'll try to get away with it. And we need to put lots and lots of money into the labs and the testing procedures, because as fast as we might generate tests to spot the drugs, the drug companies are producing masking agents to hide them. So this is an vicious cycle of hiding and finding the drugs. Pause the video and just have a look at this. This just really is information about how tests can and should be an important role. But does it really work? So here's Dwayne Chambers competing in the Olympic Games 2012. He actually lost his right to take part in athletics after being caught taking drugs. Now, some sports, athletics, swimming, cycling and rowing, make their athletes have biometric passports, and that means having had tests, they know essentially what those athletes' testing values are like. And if there are any changes and abnormalities, they'll know about it. However, Dwayne Chambers basically challenged his lifetime ban from the Olympics, and it was turned over, and this means now that he was able to return to athletics. I think 2004 he was caught, and 2012 he competed for Great Britain, and he actually performed very, very well. But the fact that he did drugs and it was overturned potentially will undermine the testing procedure and the legality procedure. So it's a real double-edged sword. Just very quickly then, some of the key anti-drug agencies you might need to be aware of. WADA, UK Sport, the BOA, the UK Anti-Doping Agency, and obviously your national governing bodies. And you can pause the video and just have a look at these more closely, or better still, visit the website themselves. So WADA is the World Anti-Doping Agency. UK Sport obviously gives advice here to athletes and guidelines and warns them of what can go wrong. This is an important website to look at, and it gives more detail about 100% Me, as it does there. And then here's an example of British Cycling, the national governing body, and what they have for their anti-doping. So let's just have a think. Is it really bad? You may have to be provocative in an exam question. Is it so bad to take drugs in sport? What are the pros and cons? Well, it's a modern world. Why not take drugs? It's a modern culture. People should have freedom of choice. If everybody could take drugs, then it's a level playing field anyway. It might make things more entertaining for spectators. Sometimes there's ambiguity in terms of what drugs are okay, what's not. Is surgery okay to replace injury, repair injury? The